Okay.
Okay. Yeah, you asked me if I had changed my outlook on things. And when I first started teaching in academia in 1989, I was your standard academic liberal like everyone else. I thought conservatives were bad people. I would never, ever vote for a Republican. But over time, I started to move right. And one reason I think was because I saw these kids coming into college and they weren't getting a good education into politics and history, a good broad humanities education, good backgrounds in religion and the languages, literature, good movies, good books. And I saw my liberal colleagues, they weren't really worried about this. They weren't really doing anything about it. And it just gradually came to me that liberalism really is mostly concerned about the present and is rather complacent about maintaining high ideals. It's kind of a live and let live, and don't believe too much in anything, and we'll let the kids do what they want to do. We don't want to be old grouches and grumps, get off my lawn types, and we don't want to be reactionaries and conservatives. That's for sure. And I thought, this is bad education. And when the digital tools came into young people's lives, and we had Web 2.0 in the mid-aughts cranking up, and Google and Amazon and Facebook started, Twitter came in 2008, and texting and iPhones and everything else was coming, that this was a disaster for the intellectual and emotional development of young people. And my colleagues weren't doing anything about it. The mentors simply let it happen. Oh, let the kids, they're all right. The kids are fine. Let them do their own thing. And we'll just sit back and let them make their own way in the world. And that really pushed me harder to the right. And there were other political things. I just read other books than what I got in my graduate school training that opened me up to becoming a more conservative every year. And I wrote that first book because it was a warning. We got teenagers in their bedrooms. They've got the phones and the TV going and the video game console, all the screens, they got the music playing, and they're shutting out the adult world, and they're opening up to this teen contact 24/7, and it's damaging them, and we're going to pay for it when they hit their 30s. And that's what's happening right now.
Was there something about you, maybe even subconscious, that made you capable of this metamorphosis over time? What is different about you than about most people that I meet of any political persuasion, that they are incapable of looking at information and saying to themselves, you know, I've got to reconsider this, or maybe this is something I wasn't aware of? Is there something inherent in you that gave you the ability to do that, where so many others who were on the same plane as you at that time can't do that?
I think it's just a visceral inability to go along with things that I know are false. I can't just let pass bogus claims. I can't go along with the crowd just because it's the crowd. I mean, didn't we all grow up believing that the lone dissenter, sort of deserves a little bit of nobility for just being a dissenter? I mean, isn't that, the American way, the American spirit was, don't push me around, don't tread on me. The great tradition of Emerson, nonconformity, self-reliance. Henry David Thoreau, he goes off to the woods, lives by himself, saying, I can't stand it around here. All of you people are living lies. Davy Crockett, people don't realize Davy Crockett, most people don't know, Davy Crockett was the great frontiersman in Tennessee. He got elected to Congress. He served 2 terms in Congress. He did some unpopular things. He opposed even though he was a great Indian fighter, he opposed the Indian removal in the 1830s from those areas. And the people didn't like him, so they voted someone else out of office. He went back to Tennessee and he said, I tried to represent the people as best I could, but if they don't want me, well, the hell with them, I'm going to Texas. And he goes to Texas, and a month later, he's dead at the Alamo. That's an American story. And, I thought, I'm no hero. Never.
Did you ever hear the essay that was written about him called Not Mine to Give?
No.
Well, very briefly, you can add it to your assortment of information. He, as you said, was a congressman, and his first time coming back to the district, of course, in those days, you didn't fly fancy jets to go back to the district. You went on horseback. And farmers and blacksmiths, blue-collar people were shouting at him, we'll never vote for you again. You're finished. And he stopped a guy named Farmer Bunce, was the last name, B-U-N-C-E. And he said, what the heck is going on? What did I do that everybody hates me? And Farmer Bunce said, sir, when you were sworn into office, did you put your hand on the Holy Bible and swear to uphold the Constitution of the United States? And he said, of course I did. And Farmer Bunce said, well, do you remember that fire that took place in Philadelphia? Yes. You voted to give taxpayer money to the victims of that fire. Where in the Constitution, in Article 1, Section 8, do you have the power to do that? And he said, well, wasn't that a good thing to do? And the farmer said, sir, it's not an issue of whether it was a charitable thing to do. It was very charitable with your own money.
Yeah.
But the Constitution does not give you that power. And so he went and he did a mea culpa in front of the entire town and apologized and swore that he'd uphold the Constitution. He goes back to Washington and they want to give money to the widow of the Negro.
Right. And he voted no.
That's right.
Yeah.
Said it is not mine to give. That's why it's called the Not Mine to Give story. He said, I learned my lesson.
Bob, well, there are several good things about that story. One, a politician willing to listen.
Yep.
And 2, citizens who are willing to say, hey, you did something wrong, and I am calling you on it. I don't care if you're a congressman. I don't care if you're a senator. I'm a citizen, and I'm going to tell you what's wrong. I mean, one of the things wrong in our country today is that these guys who live in Washington, D.C., they're dukes, princes, queens, princesses. They live like royalty. It's an aristocracy. They have entourages. They take trips and they stay in the very best hotels. They eat in the very best restaurants. They have guards around them all the time. They've got chauffeurs who drive them everywhere. They live like the aristocrats in old 18th century France. Life is very good for them. They have no contact with real people with real problems. They're completely out of touch, and they want to stay there. This is why we have 80-year-olds in Congress who still are running for re-election. They can't let go. This and this is a sign. I don't blame them. I blame the citizenry. The American spirit. Just vote them out. Why do you keep voting for these people?
Yeah.
You shouldn't be voting for this person. This person's been around for 45 years.
Well, there's something called the Freedom Index in the New American magazine. What they do is they rate every member of Congress. So between the House and the Senate, you got 535. And they rate them on do they or do they not vote with the Constitution. And it doesn't matter, Democrat, Republican, they couldn't care less. there are only 6 representatives that have a high rating out of 535. That is not a good record.
I believe it. I believe it. I mean, the money that goes into these bills, that passes through offices, it's unimaginable, the world that they live in. And one of the problems in this country today is that too many people don't respond. They're either unwilling to respond or they don't care, the way that farmer did to Davy Crockett. So the thing that we have to realize is that how much of the miseducation of young Americans was deliberate. How much did we fail to give them an idea of America that would turn them into independent, proud citizens, jealous of their sovereignty, of their prerogatives? We didn't do that.
Well, as a former college professor, I think you're a professor emeritus, I believe.
I just retired last year.
Okay. So as someone who has a lot of experience in the collegiate academic world, how do you react to this? I tell people all the time, and I'm a lawyer, so unfortunately, as a lawyer, I had to go to law school because we have these idiotic rules now that say you can't be a lawyer unless you go to law school. In the old days, Abraham Lincoln, who was one of the greatest trial lawyers of his day, he didn't go to law school, he apprenticed. So my attitude is, unless you have to go into a profession where there's no way you could be in that profession without going to school, I say it's a waste of money. Unless you're rich, then it doesn't matter.
Yeah, I mean, you can go to college and get a good education if you are extremely careful, extremely vigilant, and that means about 1 out of 200 students will be that way. For the others, apart from those who need it for the job, pre-med, let's say, college is a waste. The payoff doesn't compare to the time and the money that you spent. So generally, I would agree with what you said.
My son went to the University of Pennsylvania Law School, and look at what it costs. It's 3 times about 85 or 90. 3 times, that's roughly $270,000. I mean, that's nuts. Now, of course, you get.
But remember, Bob, as these schools are charging that much money, they are very, very proud of how inclusive and egalitarian they are.
Yeah, well, certainly not inclusive of middle class or working class Caucasian people, unfortunately. And this whole idea of turning colleges into literally country clubs. They're country clubs. They have gyms that are above the equinox. The most ritzy accommodations, like they're living on Fantasy Island. Why is that necessary? And of course, none of it could happen without government aid.
Right. No, the student loans allowed the schools to jack up the tuition big time. And it also made the schools start operating as customer service industries, so that schools need applicants. They need undergrads who are going to pay that big money. Well, how are they going to justify that big money? Top professors isn't going to do it. That's not going to impress that 18-year-old. It's the gym. It's the dormitory. It's all those fancy screens in the library. It's, do you have an organic cafeteria there at the school? It's consumer centric now. In a lot of these places, you got to make the clients, the customers, happy, and that'll make them shell out the money.
I have a lot of wealthy clients in my law practice, and some of these people spend a fortune paying consultants to get them into quote unquote the top schools.
Yeah, yeah.
These days, to me, it's an oxymoron, top school.
It's a remarkable marketing campaign that has been done for 100 years to make these, the name on that diploma count so much. The name of these Ivy League schools, the flagship state universities, that is magic that follows you for the rest of their life. That's what they have taught. And the elite, the children, the elite who are sending their children to college, they're in on it. They believe it. They want it to happen. And it's part of the network now of getting ahead universities and the top universities. I mean, look at the Supreme Court. How many schools are represented in the US Supreme Court now?
I would guess maybe 10 or 8.
If we include undergraduate and graduate, I think more than, aren't 4 of them Princeton undergrads?
I think so, yeah.
And I think the last, Scalia was Georgetown.
Right.
And I think getting out of Harvard and Yale, isn't that, I mean, Amy Coney Barrett is an exception. But the others were all a tiny, you're choosing a Supreme Court justice from a tiny sphere. And they've lived in very small worlds. I mean, and you mentioned, Abraham Lincoln in the 19th century, you had Supreme Court justices from all different walks of life. They didn't pass through this elite academic pipeline and into these top law firms and then the political DC world. But this is where we are now. This is why John Roberts is so horrible as a justice.
Yeah.
They're acclimated. They're completely acclimated to a very small world, and they have to function within that world.
I met Clarence Thomas right after the confirmation, and I went to his party in Georgetown. In fact, I sang the national anthem at the reception, because I used to be a professional singer, and he was such a decent guy. In fact, I haven't seen him in decades. And whenever he sees our mutual friend, he says, "How is that singing lawyer from New York?" He asks about me. A very gracious guy. And he's really, him and maybe Alito are the best. And ironically, he was appointed by Bush.
Yeah.
They gave the token, I guess, to the right. And now Amy Coney Barrett, she's been like a stooge for the globalists. She supports lockdowns. She supports all of these violations of our unalienable rights. So no big deal. And, everyone said, you got to vote for a Republican because they'll appoint great Supreme Court judges. Well, I don't see it that way.
I don't think so. It hasn't turned out that way.
What is, in your view, because the title is, as the sequel, that we're heading from stupefied to dangerous. What are the most dangerous things about this new generation?
Well, when we look at these 30-year-olds, we see that rates of depression and anxiety are up, narcissism is up, suicide is up, job dissatisfaction is quite high. They're not getting married and having kids, which is a sign of how pessimistic they are about the future. They were hailed back in 2008 as being tolerant and open-minded and progressive and optimistic, hardworking. But in the current surveys, they actually come off as the most intolerant generation. They have high levels of mistrust of their fellow citizens, and they have strong impulses of vindictiveness. They have a vengeful attitude toward things that happen in life. And that's where you get the cancel culture that they have made so commonplace. They feel bitter and disappointed by life, and they will join these movements that promise utopia, like Antifa and Black Lives Matter, social justice, take your pick, because they don't see anything positive in this country to believe in. They weren't raised with patriotism. They don't feel that way about America. And the cancel culture phenomenon is only going to get worse. Even though most people don't like it, it's very strong. And corporations are in on this. I mean, just think about how much money corporations gave to Black Lives Matter last year, or related organizations. So that's the danger of the millennials. They're not having kids. They are not looking to uphold American ideals. And they have joined the woke revolution with fervor. And as the baby boomers pass away, one would like to think Generation Z, the ones behind the millennials, are going to have different attitudes. But I thought that they would at some point. They don't want to listen to 30-year-olds tell them what to think, but I'm not sure Generation Z is going to be any different on these things.
I have a theory, and we'll see if it turns out to be correct, that the only thing that will wake up Americans is the coming economic collapse that I see. Because the one thing that they care about are materials, their BMWs, et cetera, et cetera. And when they lose all that, they're going to lose it. As Gerald Celente says, when they lose everything, they lose it.
But
that will be a wake-up call.
The danger, Bob, is when they lose it, who are they going to blame? Because one of the dangerous things about the 30-year-old millennials is that when they were teenagers, they had this wonderful life with all the digital tools. They could go in the bedroom, shut the door, and have all the screens going, the TV, the music, the Instagram, the phone, the video game console, and create a wonderful time for themselves and think that life was going to be that way forever. And now that they are 30 years old and life hasn't worked out that way, the vindictiveness that they express comes out of the disappointed utopian's conclusion. Why don't we have the world that we ought to have? Because there are some bad people out there. And if we just get rid of the bad people, we will get the world that we deserve. Now, if we have an economic collapse, who are they going to blame?
Well, they won't be blaming the Federal Reserve, because that would take knowledge.
Yeah, they're not now. Yeah.
I do a poll with people and I ask them, do you believe that we should have a Federal Reserve? They say yes. I said, do you believe we should have separation of church and state? They say yes. And I'm asking this of Republicans, not Democrats. Do you think that there should be public schools? Yes. Do you think there should be gay marriage? Yes. And I say to them, well, guess what? You are a communist, because those are the planks of the Communist Manifesto. And they look at me.
The Constitution either. None of that is in the Constitution.
Go ahead. I was debating a very intelligent millennial, and he says to me, so much for your noble ideals. He did it in a scoffing way, as if I'm a, naive, myopic character. Any kind of principles is a turnoff to them, and religion is a turnoff to them. I'm not the most religious guy in the whole world, but I understand that, as the founding fathers said, that we are staking this republic on the idea that people can fear God and obey God. Because without that conscience, anything goes. And take a look at what's happening. Certainly anything goes.
Anything goes. Well, if you see an election that brings about the triumph of a guy you didn't vote for, you feel that you've been robbed. You believe that something has gone wrong because the millennials are not willing to accept a pluralistic society, which means sometimes you lose. Sometimes you lose in politics. When Donald Trump won, they couldn't believe it. It was traumatic for them. And you want to say to them, do you think you get to win every time? Well, yeah, they do. They do. That's the world they grew up in. You get to win every time. And the media supported them in this with the Russia collusion hoaxes and Facebook delusions that upheld the whole resist narrative. And so why not believe that? I mean, it's easier to believe I should win every time than it is to believe, I got to lose sometimes. How nice it is to think I belong in the winner's circle every time.
Well,
I
deserve they get trophies for participation.
That's right. That's right. They enter the workplace and they realize, that 50-year-old coworker of mine really doesn't care what happened to me over the weekend. What's wrong with him? No, wait a minute. Of course they care. Or they realize that, I've got to pay taxes. And then I've got my student loan payments as well. And again, life isn't turning out the way it's supposed to turn out. Now, in many ways, they're right in that they've gotten a rotten deal, because the Bush administration and the Obama administration told all of them, you have to go to college, you have to go to college. And they made student loans very easy to get, which put these kids into crushing debt. And then they let them get degrees in some of the studies programs or in sociology, and they can't get decent jobs. And so they're stuck for 20 years with these loan payments. And they feel, I was lied to, and they were lied to. They were. The colleges promised them, if you come here, your life will blossom. We will send you into the world equipped for success. Well, they didn't. And so I think there are some reasons to sympathize with millennial bitterness. The problem is they don't have the tools to cope with that in constructive ways. They haven't read stories of failure, like Death of a Salesman, that might help them understand, what failure might be about and how to deal with failure in a better way. They haven't read the great love stories of the past that might, elevate them above the hookup culture.
Well, it's interesting. I don't know if you're familiar with Bill Kilpatrick's book, Why Johnny Can't Tell Right from Wrong.
I know.
It's an excellent book. and he's a professor, I believe, at Boston College. And in the book, his whole premise is that stories, as you just said, are always teaching methods because
They are.
so many lessons in stories. And, I was talking to my wife because it's very unusual for a Jewish girl to be as right-wing as she is. Of course, she's married to me, so you pretty much are going to be right-wing, otherwise you could never be married to me. But she said that one of the main reasons why she had a propensity towards conservatism is she was intrigued as a little girl with John Wayne movies. And those movies, rugged individualism, honesty, loyalty, an imperfect, he always played an imperfect guy. He wasn't a saint. But there was a certain ethos that emitted from those movies. And that had an unbelievable impression on her. Of course, if you look at the crap that's on TV today or in the movies today, it is such garbage. You can't even begin to describe how evil it is. And then you juxtapose that with a John Wayne movie. And most kids today would scoff at that. They would make fun of that. But if you look at True Grit, the last really famous movie that he made where he won the Academy Award, the guy's a Rooster Cogburn, who's with Katharine Hepburn, is a drunk. He curses once in a while. He's a pain in the neck, but he's always there for you when you need him because he's a man of his word and he has honor. That's gone.
Let's add to it the sports world.
Yeah.
Can you imagine Bart Starr and Jim Brown and Roger Staubach acting like these football players act today?
Ugh.
Going into the end zone, the antics that they perform. I mean, well, or I can't even watch NBA basketball. I can't watch the way they. I mean, my hero. When I was a teenager, for a time we lived in Maryland. My hero was Wes Unseld.
Oh, sure.
What? I mean, can you imagine Wes Unseld trash talking anyone?
Big, strong guy.
Strong guy, but it would never happen. Just play the game, play tough. He was great. Now, what do the kids see today in the sports? What do they see when they turn on ESPN? ESPN has its commercials. Half of the commercials are for guys dancing and celebrating instead of the actual game itself. That's what they highlight, and that's what the kids see, and they get caught up in that kind of behavior. And they don't know any better. They don't see other role models out there.
Well, my oldest son was drafted by the New York Yankees. And when he was playing in youth baseball, even all the way back to 7 or 8, he was playing shortstop and throwing everybody out, which in those days, for little kids, they never had 1, 2, 3 innings. But with him at shortstop, nothing could be hit past him. And the parents went to the head of the league, protest that he shouldn't be able to play shortstop because he's throwing out the kids and hurting their self-esteem.
Put him all right, put him out in right field. Yeah. Right. Well, this again gives kids a false sense of the real world. Because you can't do that in the real world. In the world, you can't go complain like that. I mean, one thing. I mean, when I started working, my brother and I worked. I have a twin brother. We worked at age 15. We were working in a kitchen in a country club in Maryland. And we would be working in the kitchen. Every once in a while, one of the cooks would come by and just give me one in the shoulder. The idea of going and complain, I would go, yeah, that's it. The idea that I would go and complain, to the managers, it was unthinkable to me. You just put up with it, it's like okay, a little bit of roughhousing, and I'm on the bad end of that, but you just live with it. You just tolerate it, and maybe it toughens you up a little bit. But no, not, I mean, can you imagine that happening now? It's a different world.
A fella I used to know back in the day, he's probably dead by now. He wrote a book called The Power of One in America. And he had been a school teacher. And he told the story of a kid in his class who he really liked. And when the kid graduated, he went out and started going to interviews. And he didn't get a job. And he had a lot of failures and rejections. Well, he committed suicide.
Yikes.
And the reason the kid committed suicide is he had never been allowed to fail before.
Yeah.
And so he thought that everything would be easy in the real world, like it had been made for him in the school and maybe in his home. He had no concept of the fact that the more success you want, the more failures. I mean, baseball is the great metaphor. In baseball, if you fail 2/3 of the time,
It's pretty
good. You're the best.
Yeah.
So this whole idea that you have to be protected against failure is now pervasive, and I'm sure you see it. But we got to wind down now. So I want to give you a chance to tell people where they can get the book, and also give to summarize this whole thing, give a sketch of what the books provide in terms of knowledge and perspective, and then where people can get a hold of it and how they can follow your work if they want to.
The book is really a warning to parents of teenagers, indirectly, because it says that if you let your current teenagers dive into these tools and surround themselves with youth culture, while at the same time not giving them better things to believe in, whether it be religion, country, some family tradition of some kind, to believe in starting your own family, raising your own kids in a good way. If you don't give them purpose and meaning and let them dive into youth culture, they're going to end up like our current millennials, bitter, disappointed, vindictive, not starting families, piling into houses with 3 of their buddies at age 30, replicating the patterns of adolescence because they never want to leave adolescence, going to Marvel movies and regarding them as classics, listening to the crappy music that you listen to at age 15, you're still listening to it. This is going to happen to them. So when your kids are 13, 12, 14, you've got to give them a vision of life that is deep, meaningful, positive. That's really the ultimate instruction in this book, and it lays out how the mentors in the schools are not going to do this, parents. The mentors have left the scene when it comes to giving young Americans that depth of faith and belief and strength, honor, purpose. It's not going to happen. You have to do that.
Yeah. So basically what you're saying is, in the macro level, we're not going to change all these leftists who are in control of all the schools. They basically have a monopoly, but what you can do is in your own house, do the things you're suggesting.
That's right. That's right. And certainly the popular culture isn't going to do this. That our kids are still fed through all these cell phones. I mean, remember one thing, that the designers of all these tools, the video games and Instagram and everything else, they don't let their own kids do it, by the way. They put their kids in low-tech schools in Silicon Valley, like the Waldorf schools, and Steve Jobs didn't let his kids do all these tools at home. They know what these tools do to kids, and so they keep their kids. They hired psychologists and neuroscientists, experts in addiction and attention, to help them design the tools, because that's what they want out of our kids, not their own, out of our kids. So you have to battle that in your own homes, and it's tough.
Well,
It's not easy.
being a grandparent now, I take a look at all these kids, toddlers, babies, who cannot see a human expression because the humans are all looking like a bunch of muzzled dogs, and a kid doesn't get to read a face. I was walking in the shopping center, and the controller of the state of New York, the second most powerful guy in New York, comes over to me and he says, "Hey, Bob, how you doing?" I'm like, "Who the heck are you?" All I'm doing is looking at his eyes. And then he finally temporarily took off the mask, and then I realized who it was.
Yeah.
And, you know, part of being a lawyer, one of the skills you really develop when you cross-examine a witness is you read his facial expressions.
Yeah.
And that ability has to start early.
It does. It does.
If you don't have that, your brain development is actually less.
Absolutely.
And you're going to see the result of all this masking is you're going to have mentally undeveloped and underdeveloped kids growing up on top of all the other problems.
Yeah. Well, let's remember how many of the designers of all these lockdown policies have no kids around themselves.
Yeah, like Fauci. I
No
don't know.
kids.
I don't
Yeah,
know. Walensky.
they had no kids, or the kids are out of the house.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
they're not, their kids aren't at stake in the policies that they have implemented. That's right. That's right.
I went into the synagogue, and they had this strict sign, you know, during the Jewish high holy days, you know, the Jewish New Year, Rosh Hashanah, and it said you must wear a mask. I walked in naked, maskless, and everyone looked at me, and I have a luxury. I couldn't care less.
That's where you have to be. I don't care.
Yeah.
I don't care. And that's, I would say that that's an expression of the old American spirit.
Yeah. Well, in Judaism, it says the fear of God is the beginning of all wisdom.
That's right.
Unfortunately, they transposed God into the government. And so the fear of government, and you know that old expression that when a government fears its people, you're living in a free society. When the people fear the government, you're living in a dictatorship.
Uh-huh.
And that's where, unfortunately, we are. And talk about how our listeners can get the book, and
Sure.
and if they want to follow your work.
Yeah, the book, I mean, go to Amazon. That's Amazon is the mammoth. You know, it's Leviathan. So Amazon has as the book, The Dumbest Generation Grows Up. I do a podcast twice a week at First Things Magazine, and you could just look up my name and podcast, Bauerlein. And I'm happy to respond to people when they contact me. I did that first book, The Dumbest Generation, got a lot of emails from young people who were insulted by the book. And I understand that. And I responded to every single one. And we had some good exchanges, often after we got past their 4-letter words.
Well, you're going to get accused of bullying.
That's okay. Accuse away. It's all right.
Plead guilty. All right, man. Well, it's a pleasure. Really, it's a sincere pleasure to talk to you. You're very unusual, a college professor who can actually think. It's a rare and very privileged experience to listen to you. And I hope we can stay in touch in the future.
Anytime. Thank you, Bob.
God bless. Take care.
Too.